Billionaire saved the black waitress from her cruel boss. What happened next shocked everyone. What if one moment of kindness could change everything? Jasmine wiped the coffee stains from her uniform for the third time that morning, her hands shaking as she heard her manager's voice getting louder from the kitchen. At 62, she'd been serving coffee and smiles at Murphy's Diner for 15 years, but lately, those smiles had become harder to find. The new owner, Rick, seemed to take pleasure in making her life miserable, cutting her hours, giving her the worst shifts, and finding fault with everything she did. As she straightened her name tag and took a deep breath, Jasmine had no idea that the quiet gentleman in the corner booth, the one who always ordered black coffee and left generous tips, was about to change her life forever. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes a single act of courage can ripple out in ways we never imagine. Where are you watching from today? James Mitchell had built his fortune from nothing, and at 42, he'd learned that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in the lives you touched along the way. Every Tuesday morning for the past 3 months, he'd slip into Murphy's Diner before his board meetings, not for the coffee, which was honestly terrible, but for the warmth in Jasmine's eyes when she served it. She had a way of making every customer feel like family, remembering their orders, asking about their children, and sharing a laugh that could brighten the dreariest morning. But lately, James had noticed changes. The sparkle in Jasmine's eyes had dimmed, and her usual cheerful chatter had been replaced by nervous glances toward the kitchen. He'd overheard enough conversations to piece together what was happening. Rick Donovan, the diner's new owner, had a reputation around town for being ruthless with his employees, but what James witnessed this particular Tuesday morning crossed every line of human decency. "Jasmine, you're falling behind again," Rick's voice cut through the morning bustle like a knife. "Maybe you're too old for this job. My grandmother moves faster than you, and she's been dead for 10 years. The diner fell silent. Other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Jasmine's face flushed with embarrassment as she hurried to clear a nearby table, her hands trembling as she stacked the plates. "And clean that coffee stain off your uniform," Rick continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You look like you slept in the street. This is a respectable establishment, not a charity case." James watched Jasmine's shoulders sag as if carrying the weight of every cruel word. He'd seen enough boardroom bullies in his time to recognize the pattern. The systematic breaking down of someone's dignity, the deliberate humiliation designed to make a person feel worthless. But this was different. This wasn't corporate gamesmanship. This was pure cruelty directed at a woman who'd probably never hurt anyone in her life. When Rick disappeared into the back office, James approached the counter where Jasmine was wiping down the coffee machine with unnecessary vigor, trying to hide the tears threatening to spill. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Could I get another coffee when you have a moment?" Jasmine looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, honey. I'm sorry about, well, you probably heard all that foolishness." "There's nothing for you to apologize for," James replied, his voice firm but kind. "Nothing at all." As she poured his coffee, her hands still shaking slightly, James made a decision. He'd spent his entire career fighting for fairness in business, but he'd never faced anything quite like this. Rick Donovan was about to learn that some battles you simply cannot win, especially when you've picked the wrong opponent. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, but storm clouds were gathering in ways that no one could have predicted. The next morning, James arrived at Murphy's Diner 30 minutes earlier than usual, his mind churning with possibilities. He'd spent the previous evening researching Rick Donovan, and what he'd discovered made his blood boil. The man had a history of buying small businesses, squeezing every penny from them while treating employees like disposable commodities. 3 other diners in neighboring towns had closed within months of Rick taking over, their longtime staff left with nothing. Jasmine was already at work, setting up the morning shift despite the fact that the diner didn't officially open for another hour. Her dedication was remarkable and heartbreaking. James knocked gently on the window, and she hurried over to unlock the door. "We're not quite open yet, but I can get you that coffee," she said, her voice still carrying yesterday's bruises. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk," James said. "About what's been happening here." Jasmine's face went pale. "Oh no, please don't complain to Rick. I know yesterday was, well, it wasn't professional, but I really need this job. My grandson, Tyler, he's starting college next year, and I've been saving every penny. No, James interrupted quickly. I'm not here to complain about you. Quite the opposite. As they sat in the empty diner, Jasmine shared her story in hesitant whispers. She'd raised Tyler since he was 8, when her daughter passed away in a car accident. The boy was brilliant, had earned a scholarship to study engineering, but it only covered tuition. She needed to keep working to help with his living expenses, books, and everything else that came with pursuing dreams. Rick knows I can't afford to quit, she said, staring into her own cup of coffee. Ever since he figured that out, he's gotten worse. Yesterday was nothing compared to some days. But what choice do I have? At my age, who else would hire me? That's when Rick emerged from the back office, early for once, and his expression darkened when he saw James sitting with Jasmine. What's this? Some kind of employee counseling session? Jasmine, customers aren't your friends. Get back to work. She was just letting me in early, James said calmly. I appreciate good service. Rick's eyes narrowed as he studied James more carefully, taking in the expensive watch, the perfectly tailored coat. Well, aren't you generous? Tell you what, friend, maybe you'd like to know what really goes on here. This one, he gestured dismissively at Jasmine, thinks she deserves special treatment because she's been here forever. But business is business. The cruelty in Rick's voice was unmistakable, and James felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just about poor management, this was deliberate, calculated abuse of power. As Rick launched into a tirade about entitled employees and running a tight ship, James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, sliding it across the table to Jasmine. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Jasmine glanced at the card, and her eyes widened in shock. James Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell Holdings. Rick was still talking, completely unaware that he'd just revealed his true character to one of the most powerful men in the state. The morning was about to take a turn that none of them could have anticipated. The business card trembled in Jasmine's fingers as the reality hit her. She'd been serving coffee to a billionaire for 3 months, and he'd witnessed every humiliation, every cruel comment, every moment when her dignity had been stripped away piece by piece. The embarrassment was overwhelming, but there was something else in James's eyes. Not pity, but genuine anger at what he'd observed. Rick was still ranting, oblivious to the shift in the room's energy. The problem with people like her, he continued, is they think loyalty means something. This is business, pure and simple. If she can't handle the pressure, there's the door. And what exactly is her failure? James asked quietly, his voice carrying an edge that Jasmine had never heard before. Excuse me. Rick blinked, finally sensing that something had changed. You mentioned she can't handle the pressure, James continued, standing slowly. But I've been coming here for months, and I've watched her work. She remembers every customer's order, she's never been anything but professional, and she treats people with kindness even when she's clearly struggling. So what exactly is her failure? Rick's face flushed red. Look, mister, I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am, James replied calmly. The question is whether you do. Jasmine watched this exchange with growing dread. She couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how much James might mean well. Tyler's acceptance letter was taped to her refrigerator at home, and beside it, the financial aid paperwork that showed how much they still needed. Every day of work mattered, every tip counted. Please, she whispered, touching James's arm. Don't make this worse for me. The pain in her voice stopped him cold. This was exactly what Rick had counted on, her fear, her desperation, her willingness to endure anything to protect her grandson's future. It was a trap that had kept her silent through months of abuse, and Rick knew it. See. Rick smirked. She knows where her bread is buttered. Now, I think you should finish your coffee and leave. We have a business to run. But James wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and quietly placed a call that lasted less than 30 seconds. Michael? It's James. I need you to run a property check on Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. Yes, right now. And pull the business license information for the owner, Rick Donovan. Rick's confidence wavered. What are you doing? Due diligence, James replied simply. As they waited, Jasmine felt torn between hope and terror. She'd seen enough movies to know how these stories were supposed to end, but real life was messier, more complicated. Even if James could somehow help her, what about tomorrow? What about all the other Jasmines working for all the other Ricks across the country? I've been working since I was 14, she said quietly, more to herself than to either man. Raised 5 children, buried a husband, watched my daughter die too young. I've cleaned houses, waited tables, and worked in factories. But I've never asked for anything I didn't earn. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. The phone rang, and James answered with a smile that made Rick take a step backward. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is information, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected direction. That's very interesting, Michael, James said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Rick's face. So the property lease is up for renewal in 30 days, and the landlord is actively seeking a new tenant? And the health department has received multiple complaints about food safety violations? Thank you, I'll call you back. Rick's confident smirk evaporated. You can't just, who do you think you are? James handed him a business card. Rick's face went white as he read it, and Jasmine watched 20 years of waitressing experience kick in as she read Rick's expression like a menu. The man was terrified. Mitchell Holdings, Rick whispered. You own half the commercial real estate downtown. Including the building that houses Murphy's Diner, James confirmed. Though technically, you're right, I don't own this particular property, but I know who does, and she's a good friend of mine. Eleanor Patterson. Lovely woman. We serve on the hospital board together. The color drained completely from Rick's face. Jasmine had heard that name before. Eleanor Patterson was practically royalty in their small town, known for her philanthropy and her fierce protection of working families. There's been a misunderstanding, Rick stammered, his entire demeanor shifting. Jasmine's a valued employee. Sometimes I get stressed with the business pressures, but... Stop, James said firmly. Don't insult our intelligence. He turned to Jasmine, his voice gentle but certain. How long until Tyler starts college?
Here's your oat milk latte.
August, she whispered, still reeling from everything happening around her. And how much do you still need for his expenses? Jasmine's pride warred with Tyler's future. About $12,000. But I can't accept charity. I've never. It's not charity, James interrupted. I have a proposition for you. He explained his idea quickly, and Jasmine felt her heart hammering. Mitchell Holdings was opening a new corporate cafe in their downtown office building. They needed an experienced manager who understood customer service, someone who could train a small staff and create the kind of welcoming atmosphere that James had experienced at Murphy's Diner. The salary would be $65,000 a year to start, full benefits, and Tyler could work part-time there during school breaks if he wants to help with college expenses. All I ask is that you bring that warmth and kindness that you've shown me every Tuesday morning. Rick sputtered protests, threats about contracts and obligations, but James cut him off. Jasmine doesn't have a contract with you beyond today. I checked. And if you try to interfere with her future employment, I'll make sure Eleanor knows exactly how you've been treating the woman who's been the heart and soul of this place for 15 years. Jasmine felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of humiliation. Tyler could really go to college, she whispered. Tyler's going to college regardless, James said firmly. The only question is whether you'll be working somewhere that values you or somewhere that doesn't. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As Rick realized his kingdom of cruelty was crumbling around him, Jasmine looked around the diner that had been both her salvation and her prison. Sometimes the end of one chapter was just the beginning of something beautiful, and sometimes the guardian angel wore a business suit and drank terrible coffee just to watch kindness in action. 6 months later, Jasmine stood behind the gleaming counter of Mitchell Holdings Executive Cafe, watching Tyler arrange fresh pastries in the display case. The boy had grown 3 inches since starting college, and his confidence had grown even more. He'd insisted on working summers and weekends, not because they needed the money anymore, but because he wanted to understand what his grandmother had always known, that honest work, done with pride, was its own reward. "Grandma, your favorite customer is here," Tyler called out with a grin. James entered right on schedule, just like he had every Tuesday morning for years, but now he was greeted by Jasmine's radiant smile instead of hidden tears. The cafe had become legendary within the building, not just for its excellent food, but for the warmth that seemed to infuse every interaction. Jasmine had hired 3 other women, all over 50, all with stories of their own. Together, they'd created something special. "The usual?" Jasmine asked, though she was already pouring his black coffee. "Actually," James said, settling into his favorite corner table, "I was hoping we could talk about the expansion plans." The cafe had been so successful that Mitchell Holdings was planning to open 3 more locations, and they wanted Jasmine to oversee the entire operation. She'd be training managers, developing systems, and most importantly, ensuring that every employee was treated with dignity and respect. "I never thought I'd be running a business at my age," Jasmine laughed, joining him at the table. "Tyler keeps teasing me about getting my MBA next." "Stranger things have happened," James replied with a smile. They talked about the future, about Tyler's excellent grades, about the scholarship fund they'd established for other students from working families. Through the large windows, they could see Murphy's Diner across the street, now closed, with a "for lease" sign in the window. Rick Donovan had lasted exactly 31 days after their confrontation, and Eleanor Patterson had made sure his reputation followed him to whatever rock he'd crawled under. "Sometimes I think about that morning," Jasmine said quietly. "What would have happened if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't cared enough to step in?" "But I was there," James replied firmly. "And more importantly, you were there. You'd been showing kindness and grace under pressure long before I arrived. All I did was make sure the right people knew about it." Tyler appeared at their table with a plate of homemade cookies, a recipe Jasmine had taught the entire cafe staff. As James bit into one, he was transported back to his childhood, to his own grandmother's kitchen, to the understanding that love could be baked into simple things. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to come to Murphy's for the coffee, but I kept coming back because of how you made people feel. That hasn't changed. It's just gotten bigger." Jasmine looked around her cafe, at Tyler chatting with customers, at her staff working together like family, at the photos on the wall showing the scholarship recipients who were now changing their own futures. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. A kind word, a moment of standing up for what's right, the simple decision to see others as deserving of dignity. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for taking this journey with us, and may you find your own moments of unexpected kindness today.